What do CEOs need to know about sales these days? A lot. Outdated sales strategies and tactics plague most companies today. Listen to what innovative CEOs and experts have to say about how to change all that with Sales Talk for CEOs. Welcome to Sales Talk for CEOs. Today, we're going to talk about authenticity, something many of us have been considering. In fact, maybe even wondering, what is it? What does it actually mean? Should we be authentic? But today, we're going to be really curious about this, because what if it was the number one strategic advantage that could make a huge difference for you? And so I've invited Erin Hatzikostas, who I met in April at the Ace Tech Summit. When I heard her presentation, it blew me away. And so I wanted to bring her on the show today. CEOs, this is for you and your leadership teams. Erin, welcome to the show.
Yeah, it's so great to see you.
Really good to see you again. And I love your glasses.
Thanks.
All right. For those of you who are just
see.
listening, right, and can't see, she has these really cool glasses with kind of big frames, and they've got a lot of colors on them. They're just really cool. So, hey, let's start off just by jumping in and having you tell us exactly what you do to help companies.
Yeah, it sounds super weird and super fluffy. In fact, I was talking to our water guy came today. You know, every couple of years he comes and he's a talker. And I was so busy, but I was like, okay. And he was like, oh, you run your own company. What do you do? What do you? And I said, well, I help people and companies use authenticity as their strategic advantage. And he's like, oh, well, that sounds like maybe a dying business. And I was like, actually, it is thriving because the bar in business is so low, and those companies and those leaders that can see that authenticity actually is something you have to work at and that you do for other people. And then it has to be something that you focus on because the norm is to be inauthentic. They can really have an advantage. And I remember, I have to say this right up front because we have maybe some other CEOs like the ones at Ace Tech, but I don't know if you remember, I got about 5 minutes into my talk, which was hilarious. One of the CEOs, I don't usually get this, right? Usually I kind of get through my talk. And he's like, raises his hand. And I was like, okay, you have a comment? I hadn't even gotten into my content. And he's like, well, authenticity. I mean, it's like a no brainer. We have to be authentic. We are. And I looked at him and I was like, no, you're not. And so we can dive into what I mean by no, you're not, and what it means to truly be authentic.
Yeah, absolutely. And really, I just want to pause for a minute and restate what you said. You help companies and leaders, right? People, humans, right? And the people who make up companies use authenticity as their number one strategic advantage. Now, because I've already heard, you talk, I know you're talking internally and externally. And I think this is so important. And I also think, I agree. We were chuckling when that CEO raised his hand and he's like, oh yeah, that's just a given, right? Everybody's authentic. And I'm thinking, actually, no, they're not. And that begs the question, what is authenticity, Erin?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really important question, as nerdy as that sounds. I'll tell you what it's not. It's not be yourself.
Right.
It's also not.
It's not come to work and be in a crappy mood because you didn't sleep and you're just being yourself. That's
being
not
yourself for you because it makes you feel good. Right. It's also not be transparent. It's not synonymous like that. We saw that with the Silicon Valley Bank CEO who was a little too transparent, which started the spiral. Like, oh, I really am not sure we can cover our asses out here or whatever. And so the root word is authentikos, and it's Greek, of course, and it means to be three things. It means to be genuine, but it also means to be original and authoritative. And there's two sort of foundational definitions that I give to help you ground yourself. The first is that authenticity is really about exposing who you are when people least expect it in the service of others. And that last part is so important. And what I mean by that is authenticity, because, and we have the data, we did the research, we know it intuitively, is an absolute fast pass to connection, to trust, and also to sort of intrigue or differentiation. And so when you start to realize that authenticity isn't about you, it's about other people. And it's also not, and this is what that CEO was thinking about, to go back to that, it's not how you act in a room with your direct staff, with a one-on-one. That is easy. The place, the gap, the opportunity is basically everywhere else. So for CEOs in particular, it is when you go, you face off at board meetings, client meetings, town halls. What happens is there's either your handlers, and I know that most of the listeners here don't have as many handlers. What I mean by handlers is my flippant way of like your corporate comms and your legal people and the people that are like your chief of staff trying to make you what they think make you look good. The problem is what they do is they make you look inauthentic, right? Because they make your talking points and they make you sound perfect, etc. So it really, authenticity is much more nuanced, and it takes a recognition that you actually have to do it, like you said, in places that are unexpected. The second definition that'll sort of, I won't triangulate because it's only two, but like bring it together, meatloaf it together, is authenticity is also about focusing on not what is normal, but what is needed. And it kind of gets to that. We get so stuck in wheels in motion. So let me give you an example. You've got a pitch deck. You're going out to raise funds. What's normal? A long, 35-page pitch deck with the normal like graphs and client, right? Like the formula. But if you really stop and think, okay, if I'm on the other side of that, what is really needed? Well, it depends on the meeting, but in one meeting, it might be, I need to gain the trust. Like they need to trust me, right? Because we all know they invest in the founder. So maybe spend less time on the perfect deck and more time on, for example, introducing yourself with what I call an intriguing intro, which kind of, instead of being all like prim and proper and giving your resume, in a shortened version, you use a humility moment to gain trust. You talk about something you did not very well. You use some of the principles that I outlined in my framework to actually gain the trust. And so that's really gets to the original part, and always focusing, not on going through the motions, but giving people what they want. And what they want is what they truly want, but they also want fresh and new and something that doesn't feel like part of, a playbook that's been around forever.
Right. You mentioned three words. You said genuine, original, and
Authoritative.
authoritative. So
Yeah.
I think like really focusing on those words for a moment in
Mm.
conjunction with what you just said, which was focus on what is needed. So, for example, when there is some sort of crisis or something bad happens at a company, if you're genuine, original, and authoritative, focusing on what is needed, that message will be different than here are some talking points, to make you sure you stay on, the company line here, right?
Correct.
Because when you deliver something and you are not genuine and authoritative, how much attention are you going to keep? You might get it for a second, but are you going to keep it? And is that message going to be memorable? And especially if it's a super important message, either on something really good or something not so good. So I think that those are things for CEOs to think about. And that fast pass to trust, which you said. So when things are not going as well as you'd like, you need people to trust you to improve them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if you don't have that authenticity, they're going to be like, oh my gosh, I have no confidence in this person. I don't know what's going to happen. Right.
Right.
So
Right.
I think that is super important, and that focus on what's needed for your internal comms, you inside your company, or if you're communicating with customers or the world. Now, a lot of CEOs are out there in the world. They're doing podcasts and they're doing LinkedIn, thought leadership. And I wish more of them would do both of those things. But let's talk about authenticity in that setting. And what does that mean? And how can CEOs appear online in all the different places where their customers might be as authentic and being a thought leader and bringing something of value.
Yeah. I mean, I would actually even step back on that and say, you don't have to do it, but you do have to reduce your 0 moments of truth down to 0. Now, what the heck is 0 moments of truth, or ZMOT? It's really important. If you're a CEO and you don't know what ZMOT is, especially if you're in the B2B worlds, which many of you I'm sure are, even if you're not, your product isn't you, right? You're selling to investors, you're selling to partners, et cetera. 0 moments of truth is this idea that it used to be first moments of truth. So that would be when somebody was going to purchase something, they'd see maybe a new cereal in the cereal aisle. They'd look at it. Do I want to try this or not? First moment of truth. They decide whether or not they're going to buy it. Well, that's not how it works in large transactions. That's not how it works in this world of the internet. What 0 moments of truth says is that there is a time way before purchase that people need to feel comfortable to make that purchase. And there's 3 requirements. It says that they need 7 hours, 11 interactions over 4 locations. Now you might be like, no, I don't know. Our business doesn't take that much. Well, I would argue. So if you think about kind of the olden days, I don't know, maybe it's current days for some people, but I call it the old days where, deals were all about, oh, we got to go out on the golf course. We got to have a, steak dinner. We got to fly across the country, and you do all of these things. Well, what were they doing? They were essentially trying to cut down that ZMOT significantly, right? Additional location, more time with them. It is sort of a know, like, and trust, right? How can you really get to somebody? Because in those meetings, you don't not just connect with them fully, but you don't really understand what's important to their business, what's really holding them back, what's going to be their decision things. So in this modern world, you can still do that. God bless you. I don't have time. And I know that my clients, I can't get them to go 4 hours on the golf course, even if I did have the time. You have other options to reduce ZMOT down to 0. And one of those is relationships. That cuts down significantly. That's been around forever, right? So if Alice introduces me to Joe, my ZMOT might not go to 0, but it might go down in half. The second one is content creation. And LinkedIn, obviously, in our world is sort of I think the easiest, the most effective, because that's where people are. And what happens is when you put content out, people can stalk you. They can try to figure out if they like you. They start to cross off ZMOT, right? Different locations, number of hours, and your buyers and your partners, they're busy. So it's on demand. So like, let me see if I like this Joe guy or not. I'll watch the video he just did, interviewing some of his team. And so that is a significant ZMOT reducer. And then the third is authenticity. And obviously authenticity can go into your content, but also when you do emails, when you do meetings, I can give you countless examples of me getting on a Zoom call with a very stuffy, most of my clients are insurance executives. I'm working with an insurtech right now. God bless the CEO. But when I first got on the call with him, like he couldn't even really look at me. He's very introverted, kind of very different than me. And just by using some of the principles that I teach and talking a little bit about something I just messed up on, or saying words that weren't quite so buzzwordy, and juxtapositioning that though with my intelligence and what I know, it's so fun. I saw, like, within 10 minutes, I saw him smiling, saying things in ways that he wasn't saying before. And so, yeah, when I think about content online, I always tell people, I'm like, you don't have to do it, but you do have to reduce ZMOT to 0. And I would personally rather do some posting and some things on LinkedIn than sit in Zoom meetings, 12 times to win a client.
Well, and they're not even going to give you that kind of time, Erin.
No,
Come on,
no.
right? It's not going to happen. So, all right. So this 0 moments of truth, like, we want to reduce it down so they don't have to have these moments where it's like, oh, should I choose you or shouldn't I choose you? I don't know you. I'm not sure. We want to get it to, I'm comfortable with you. I've seen you before. I see who you are. I like who you are, and I trust that. And therefore now I'm willing to have a conversation. And like you said, it's 7 hours, 11 interactions, 4 locations. And when I'm helping people reach out cold, which I really, really don't like to do, I prefer people get an introduction and go to trade shows and use content and do everything but cold outreach, because it's just so hard. And really no one likes it. The people doing it don't like it, and the people receiving it don't like it. But if you are using cold outreach as a method, think about what this means. So 7 hours, 11 interactions, 4 locations for cold outreach, right? And we already know that it takes, somewhere between 8 and 12 touches, right? If you're doing some sort of cold outreach with a combination of locations, email, LinkedIn, phone, maybe texting, maybe mail, whatever it is. So, I mean, this all applies really directly, right, to selling and increasing sales. And
100%.
it's something that the CEOs can do to contribute, right,
Yeah.
to making it easier to gain new customers.
Yep.
So,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah. All right. So I know you have a new book coming out, and I'm excited to share about what is the 50% rule.
Oh my God. I'm really weirdly obsessed with both the rule and the book. The book is really fun to read, but the rule is more important. It's really powerful. So let me give you just kind of how it transpired and why it turned into a book and why I'm obsessed. So, 5.5 years ago, I left my CEO position. I was running a healthcare financial company of about 1,000 people. Had tremendous success turning it around. We went from really being in the pooper to tripling earnings, skyrocketing employee engagement. And I decided to leave, wandered around and found myself, sort of in this moment where I realized that authenticity was actually the thing. That was my strategy. That was my differentiator. And so I was, out there writing my first book, doing talks, did a TED Talk. Meanwhile, I was learning myself, because I'd always been at a large corporation, B2B, how to be an entrepreneur in this space, right? And so I was consuming the bazillion playbooks and masterminds and, fast forward sort of tips of how you can build your speaking career and all these things, right? And so I was part of this mastermind 2 days in Nashville, and we were working on a topic, and there was like 80 some page PowerPoint that basically was like, here you go. Here's like the keys to, you don't have to figure this out yourself. And I should have been thrilled, but I was absolutely paralyzed. And I just remember thinking, and a lot of your listeners are probably, like me, I kind of call myself part badass, part head case, right? Like, but I mean, in general, I have crushed a lot of things in my career. And so when you feel this like demotivation, it's tough, because you're like, oh, maybe I've lost it. Maybe I've run out of steam, right? And then I remember sitting there, and I thought, what if you 50% rule this, Erin? And the 50% rule I had used in a different context. I don't know, I grabbed it out of like the attic of my brain. And what I meant when I said that to myself was, what if you only take about half of what they're teaching you and give yourself permission to throw out the other half? Like, not do it, but give yourself permission right up front. Like, this one feels a little inauthentic to me. This one feels like it wouldn't work. This one just, it's too much work. But don't half-ass it. Then leave room for you to bring in 50% of your own ideas. Understand, like, what is their intent? What are some things they haven't tried before? And so, it's funny when I tell people about this, they're like, yeah, I do this. And I'm like, same as like I said to this, I'm like, you do and you don't. Because I will tell you, even when I was writing the book, there were things that I got stuck on in other contexts. And I was like, oh, wait, why don't you 50% rule it? And I had been spending for like, a year on it. And so that was the first thing where I was like, oh, I'm excited. I'm motivated. Like and I talk about this now in the book, why I was motivated. It's called the self-determination theory. There's actually science. It's not an Erin thing. So anyway, I left there. I started using that as an entrepreneur. Of course, there were many times where I forgot to use it and got really like stuck, and then it hit me, right? And these things, it's just like anything, like you just get faster and faster at applying it. But then, it felt like every time somebody came to me with a problem, whether it was a client of mine or just a friend, and they would say something, and I would just be like, why don't you 50% rule it? And they're like, huh? What is that? And I would explain it, and I would just, right, I see them light up. So this went on for a couple of years where, just naturally using this little rule, seeing it help so many people, but still not enough to write a book. Like, that would be pretty lame. But then what happened is it's sort of like if you're going to buy a new car and you're like, oh, I really want the Honda Accord. And then like the white Honda Accord, and you see the white Honda Accord everywhere. I
Right.
started seeing the 50% rule everywhere. So an example, I went and saw Hamilton for the first time, finally, last summer. And I'm sitting there, of course, mind blown. But I'm like, he 50% ruled Broadway, right? He did half normal and half new. And, I would watch, I watched John Madden's documentary. I'm a huge sports nut. And I was like, oh my God, he 50% ruled sports broadcasting. Like, he almost didn't become a sports broadcaster because he was like, I don't want to be a hair dude. I want to do it. And then he decided, and then he brought in, right, his crazy writing and coaching and style, authentic style. I saw it with the Savannah Bananas. I saw it with Shopify. I saw it with the Whitney Houston national anthem. Like, I started seeing it. And what I saw was this rule wasn't just a permission to get over your poop. This was a formula that actually helped people kind of go from underdog to unmatched. Like Weird Al Yankovic, I talk about him. He's a big character in the book. He's a terrible singer. He's a megastar. 50% rule in music. And for me, and I didn't really realize this till I wrote the book. This is part of what happens, right? You learn a lot as you slow the heck down and write. Was that I've been doing it my whole life, and in many ways, I had realized, stop trying to compete like everybody else. It's exhausting. It's hard. You have to. Then the formula is, if you work harder than them, you'll do better, and that's no fun. Like, that's not the camp I want to be in. But if you do things half normal, like, you'll leave them in the dust, all of a sudden people will notice you. And so I think for CEO, I mean, the book is a little bit of self-development, but it's really a very, sassy, but business development growth book. Cause I tell so many stories that can inspire you to do half normal, half new, and then watch the magic happen.
I love that too, because it fits in your definition of authenticity with genuine, right? Be genuine. I can't do all this. I don't want to do it this way. That's genuinely what you feel. But then you're thinking, oh, do I have to follow the rules and do all 80 pages, right? But you're being genuine and listening to yourself that no, I don't want to do that. Right. To you're being original by 50%ing it. You're like, I can do 50% of this and still make a lot of headway and add my own originality to it. Right. And then that brings the authority, right? So because you've given yourself permission, now you have that authority with it that helps you. It's confidence, truly, right? That's what it is.
Yep.
That authority is confidence. And so I think that's why that 50% rule works. And I love what you said. They laid it out in front of you, said, here, we're going to give it to you. Here's the whole thing. You don't have to do a thing. Just read this and follow the instructions.
Right.
That would have overwhelmed me. And I probably would have felt like throwing up at that moment. Right. And I think that these are the moments, and we know because it hits us in the gut, right? When it's like, I want to do that, but I don't really want to do that. Why don't I want to do it? Because I don't want to do it their way. I want to do it partly their way so that I can do it, but I want to add my own to it.
Yeah. Right? And the self-determination theory, which was research done 40 years ago, proves this. It basically says that people aren't actually motivated by money. The number one thing that motivates them is, they call it sort of quote unquote autonomy. And autonomy means they have a say in what they do. And so, I mean, what's great, and that's what I love about the rule. It's part, makes you not feel crappy anymore about places where you're sort of demotivated, and it gives you that permission. And then why I'm obsessed with it is that it's like a 1-2 punch, because then if you also do that and you really follow it and do 50% totally new. And in the book, there's like over 60 quotes and lessons and there's like a jigsaw puzzle that brings it all together. And one of those is juxtapositions create joyful jolts. And what that means is the opposing things, like the Hamilton's a great example of when leaders can understand that, like, if they start to combine like their traditional, tech business that sounds very smarty pants with something fun, like one of the things I wrote about in there is like, maybe you say, oh, but everything's going to be food themed. And anytime they install our software, we're going to, send them a DoorDash and call it sort of no customer goes hangry, so that they can eat while they do it. Like, that's going to be memorable. Right. And then when you update your software, maybe you send a Snickers bar or whatever. So when you start to like juxtapose, for example, like tech heavy smart with things that they wouldn't expect, people's minds get blown. They start to talk about it and they follow you.
Yeah, yeah. And that's what you want. Talking about you in a good way, right? Talking about you. Wow, that's different. That's interesting. Something I wasn't expecting. Wow. All right. Well, as we wrap up here, I want to go back to our original statement, which was using authenticity as the number one strategic advantage. Just give us a couple parting words on how to be specific in doing that.
Yeah. So I would say, I have a humans framework, which is training wheels to get away from the normal. And so it is, humans stands for humility. So purposely use humility in your town hall, in your communications, when you don't know something, etc. Be unexpected is the U. So find ways to make people lean in. This is kind of the don't do normal. When you don't do normal, it's unexpected. And then people are like, well, I'm not going to look away because I don't know what's coming next, right? Versus the pre-programmed. The M means model. And that's just really about model. It's like showing up and shutting up, demonstrating. People don't listen to words. They watch what you do. And then adapt. So that's, plug in and grow. I talk more about that in the book. N is narrating. There's a big one. Tell freaking stories. Tell stories, tell stories, tell stories. It takes work. But as you go into sales presentations and things like that, find ways, whether they're metaphorical, they're literal. I have a huge chapter on storytelling that's inspired by Tommy Boy, my favorite storyteller, who finally was able to sell through his dad's auto parts, brake parts, through storytelling. But really way underused. And then the final is spark. Understand that you doing authenticity, both on a micro level and a macro level, will ignite other people to do it. And when you can recognize that authenticity, one, is going to get you what you want, but that you're doing it for other people, you're doing it for that connection and trust. But then you're also doing it for the greater good of your team around you. You're giving them permission. They're going to start to flourish. That's when your authenticity really becomes, the fabric of your company, and can make you stand out against all those other schmucks you're competing with.
Absolutely. Absolutely want that strategic advantage. All right. I have 3 questions for you before we part ways today. And the very first one is, what is a book that you think every CEO should read?
Yeah. So, I mean, beyond my own, and I'm saying that because I love them.
Of
They're
course.
funny and snarky and not boring. And I have a hard time reading most business books because they're not funny, snarky, and fun. But the best one I've read in the last year is called Oversubscribed. I think it would be really good for your audience. Highly recommend it. I actually read that whole thing, which I don't read most of them front to back. So
All right. I'm putting that on my list. Oversubscribed.
Yeah, really good one.
And what's a podcast that you love because it makes you think differently?
Oh, I'm obsessed with How I Built This, which by Guy Raz. Probably everybody says that.
Oh my
I know
gosh.
it's
No,
cliche.
actually they don't, but that is one of my all-time favorites, Erin.
Yeah. And anybody can you listen to that story, you're going to get a different lesson, then I'm going to get a different lesson. How I Built This. If you're a CEO listening to this, you don't listen to that, man, oh man, you're not smart. Get that podcast on your listening.
It's
stuff
a good one and it's
immediately.
fun. It's really
super
fun
great.
to listen to. Yeah.
Yep.
And last question, what does every CEO need to win in this marketplace?
Humility, and wearing that on their sleeve. Can't preach it enough. I don't care what your political association is, but if you look at, what's going on with Tim Walz and even Kamala, and you start to watch some of their things, they are using authenticity as their number one true definition of it, not blurt out what you say. And a big part of that is their humility and the setting aside the ego. You have to understand, looking smart, people are still going to respect you more. And so if you have the confidence to not have to put on that facade when you're external, and you lead with that true humility, and you lead and you do it purposely, you tell people about things that you mess up and do bad, you can just say goodbye to all your competitors. You'll leave them in the dust.
Be intentional and purposeful, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Erin, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I know that all the CEOs and those who support CEOs that were listening got a lot. I'll put a lot of stuff in the show notes, and I'll also put the book in the show notes. So thank you so much for joining us. And just the last thing, where should people find you?
Well, so two things. If you're a podcast listener, like you must, once you're done with this, we have a podcast called Because Work Doesn't Have to Suck. It's just the letter B and then cuz. So if you want something a little zany, we do part interviews, and then I have a co-host. It's as authentic as hell, and it really helps you with what I teach, right? How do you be inspired by other people's stories of using authenticity as their strategy? And then the other place, I'm sort of a LinkedIn loser. Like, I'm on there all the time. So if you want
do
to
a great job on
me,
LinkedIn. So much good content, really fun to follow you. So yeah. And
Yep.
if you do connect with her, contact her via LinkedIn, please let her know that you heard her on my show, so she'll accept your connection request.
That's a great idea. Well played. Well played, Alice.
Very good. Well, thank you so much, Erin. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for having me on.
If you enjoyed the show, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next week.